Hi, John Moran.
Hey, Pandora, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks. And how are you?
I'm doing really well today. Thank you. I was going to wear my Hawaiian shirt, and as I was putting it on, I bought it like 15 years ago. I got fat with COVID. This is a COVID podcast here. It didn't fit. And I bought it at Target. My oldest daughter was with me. And when I pulled it off the rack, she said, "Oh, dear God, Daddy, please don't. Please don't. Don't wear the Hawaiian shirt." And she started to cry. And I was like, all right.
There's a story there, I guess.
I think she saw some kind of like Animal House movie, and everybody that was a bad guy was wearing an Hawaiian shirt and had a beer can in his hand.
Well, that would influence you.
Yeah, that would do it.
We all know influences come in different packages, but I would have been fine with the Hawaiian shirt. I haven't done the COVID. Some people, instead of freshman 15, they're calling it COVID-19.
Oh my God, yeah.
That would be good if it had stopped at 19. This thing's gone on really so long that I think if you're eating, first of all, let's be grateful that we have food that we're eating.
That's right.
And it's such a comfort. That's where comfort food came from. But I think in times like this, have at it. It's self-soothing. I heard also that, alcohol sales had gone through the roof.
Oh, skyrocketing. Yeah. It's an essential service.
Apparently, under first responders, and you can have it outside now. I can't believe they relaxed so many things. Anyway, one of the reasons I mean, you're in New York, and you've been in New York through this entire COVID, I don't know what to call it,
crisis, really. Yeah.
What'd you call it?
Crisis. Yeah.
COVID crisis. When it first began, I heard someone say, we really need to understand this is not a COVID blizzard. It's a COVID winter.
Yeah.
And even at that point, we thought, okay, a season. Well, we've gone really, for some people, when in New York did it really hit? I would say March up here in Maine, but.
Well, people started talking about it early February, in terms of what's happening in China, it's best to my recollection. Okay. Late February, I don't know when the first official case was diagnosed, but I met with somebody, I'd have to look at the date, I think it was March 3rd. And he was actually one of the first COVID cases in New York. So I was one of the first people to be quarantined or to self-quarantine that I know of. Yeah.
And you didn't get it?
I did not get it. No.
Thankfully. How is your friend?
He's had his ups and downs. Very interesting. His only pre-existing condition was childhood asthma, and he hadn't had a recurrence of that in a long time. I've known him for, 20 years now. He's a good friend, close friend. We see each other all the time, go out to dinner all the time. Athlete, very healthy. And I never knew him to use an inhaler, but he gave me a call that first week in March and said that he thought he had this COVID. And he went through absolute hell, couldn't get any testing. So the whole arc of the history of the response to this virus he had to go through, where people misunderstanding what it was, including the medical profession, not being able to get tested. He actually then not to be able to get the test results or a lab to actually give him the test results. He actually had to call the CDC himself and have his sample sent to the CDC, because that was prior to all of this. Oh, and I can't hear you right now. I don't know why.
I wasn't saying
anything. There you go. You weren't saying anything. That's why.
I was actively listening, and also, I think, trying to process comprehend what you said, which is while he's sick, very
Yeah.
ill, he has to then call the CDC himself.
He had to call the CDC because there was no place to get the tests actually processed. So they sent it out to the CDC. He did a podcast. I don't know. He actually was called by PBS, I think, and I think he did a podcast on PBS. I'm not sure where it was, but he did a COVID podcast early on. The doctor, I don't think, did the test properly. I think there, it was early on, and I don't know exactly what the problem was, but it was an invalid test. He went back, he tested positive. He was too sick to get out of bed, but not sick enough to go to a hospital.
By hospital criteria,
well, yeah, because there was nothing that they could do for them. I could tell you different stories that might make a cohesive whole. I live in a blue collar neighborhood, and my very best friends from childhood, my next door neighbors are 2 ambulance drivers, 2 EMTs. Friend from childhood lives around the block, a nurse who was called back to the emergency room for COVID. Friends that work in hospitals, friends who are police officers, friends who are firemen. And there was a point in New York, I think it was early March, like second or third week in March, where the body count was so high that they were putting refrigerated trucks outside the hospitals and nursing homes and putting the bodies there.
That was a pretty tough thing to see on the news. I can't imagine being in New York and literally seeing those or walking by, and it was tough to see it. And they had one of the heads of that particular unit. I don't even know what to call it, the morgue. I guess it was.
Yeah, it's the morgue. Yeah.
And I don't know. I have such admiration for these people who just have kept on keeping on through this.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was quite a visual.
Yeah, there were a lot of visuals like that. Yeah. There was one of those trucks outside of this annex for, it used to be St. Vincent's Hospital. I don't know what it is now. It's on 13th Street and 7th Avenue, but it used to be an annex for St. Vincent's, and it's a small building, an emergency room, an emergency facility. Ambulances go there. And there's a park right across the street. And they had one of those refrigerated tractor trailers, a 48-footer outside. And they had like a party awning that they might set up for like a bridal party that went from the door to this trailer, so you couldn't see the bodies actually being pushed on the gurneys in there. So you could actually take a picture from the southeast corner of like 11th Street across to this facility. And you see these beautiful flowers, children playing in the park, and this trailer there all at the same time. And that was pretty much summed up New York for the month of March. That's where we were at, but I have to say, my neighbors suffered. My neighbor's partner, EMT, he passed away. He caught the disease, and my friend around the block, one of her coworkers working in the emergency room, had to go on a ventilator. And he made it through. 80% of the people who went on ventilators didn't make it through. He made it through. I was fine. My friend got very, very sick. He's still sick. He's kind of a late COVID test case because he's had it now since the end of February. And what's happening to him now is that he'll feel good for 2 or 3 days. Then he says his lungs feel like sandpaper. He went to the doctor last week and they did a test for inflammation. I seem to remember saying it was a KD test, but I don't know if that's accurate.
Know what that is. But...
Yeah, it's a test to test inflammation within your body. And so it was off the charts. So he had a voicemail before he even got home to go straight to the emergency room. And so apparently what's happening is there's a subset of people where they're getting thousands of tiny blood clots in their capillaries, and then it goes away, and then it comes back, or it doesn't go away. But he's fought through it like a 5 or 6 cycles already.
5 or 6 cycles?
Yes, constantly, every other week he's getting sick. So it's not letting go there. And another friend of mine, a matter of fact, I'm going to see him on Sunday. Wonderful guy. He caught it. He had like heavy flu-like symptoms, then it went away, but he hasn't had a sense of smell or taste since it's gone away. So that's been about 6 weeks now.
You know, that was batted around as an early sign, and whether it is or it isn't, and I know that there isn't really a reliable list where everyone gets the same thing. It's
right. It's a strange one.
And it's a strange one. But, you know, when you think about, we were talking about the COVID-19 and comfort food and being able to do that, losing smell and taste.
Yeah, it's one of the comforts of life, right?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, those are important aspects of what many of us associate with pleasure.
Yes.
My son walked into the 1904 cottage that we're in Maine. He says, "I love the smell of this place. It's just steeped with such a rich sense of all these people who have passed through it." I thought, I'll never be angry about the musty stuff again.
There's history in these odors.
History, if the water could talk is what I think. I can't imagine. I mean, 1904, that's coming back. But, you know, so how is your friend doing emotionally, or just, you know, 5 or 6 cycles? This is when we start to think, I'm never going to feel well again, right?
Yeah, I haven't heard that from him. I've heard, you know, the expression a day at a time. I've heard an hour at a time or a minute at a time. And, you know, he'll go up and down on a given day. He is a guy that cares about other people. I think that helps him quite a bit. He's a teacher. He's a student. You know, he has a ton of students. I think that he's online teaching when he can. He's grading papers. He's counseling when he can. He's always been available to his friends. And I think that mental orientation really helps carrying you through. I think that if you're in a state, which I've been in my life, so I understand it, where it's entirely about me, self-centered, self-seeking, and selfish, and you get hit by COVID, all of a sudden, everybody's kind of running for the hills, and then what do you do? And I think that's when it gets tougher. But I think people who have more of a sense of community are doing well. And I can say this, you know, reading the newspapers, you know, just seeing what's going on in the world, I stay pretty informed. Those places where the disease hasn't hit heavily, of course, it's a very political thing. It's us versus them. It's the economy versus everything else. But here in New York, we do have this huge spectrum of people from all around the world, from ultra conservatives to ultra liberals to radicals to anarchists to monarchists. But because the disease is in our lap, there's no question here that wearing a face mask is political or not. Everybody's doing it. When we're in the supermarkets, we're all doing well. And, you know, we went from a spot where we were over, you know, a 50% infection rate, they thought, down to 2% in the state as a whole. And last time I looked was last week, was about 19% in New York was the infection rate. And just riding the subways, being on the streets, the vast majority of people, unless they're mentally ill, are cautious and kind to each other. And it reminds me of 9/11 in a way, where, yeah, you know, where those buildings came down and everybody showed up for work the next day and were compassionate and practical, you know. So
I heard it said that everyone's had COVID, whether you've tested for it or not, for the following reasons: the dramatic shift in lifestyle to
yes,
sheltering in place. And most people say, come again. What is that? We don't know what that is. The other piece is the fear that you can be around someone without symptoms and get it, or not even be able to do that contact tracing and so forth. And then I had a client who actually became sick with it and said, I was relieved. I said, you were relieved to get COVID? He said, you know what? I felt like the fear of walking around, will I get it? Won't I get it? I got it. I got it already. It's, and I'm over it. And he went through a tough time. Nothing like your friend, who I think has to be one of the, well, he's alive. And,
right.
and I wanted to comment about what you, how you described him, because the visceral feeling I got listening to you speak about his generosity, his appreciation, his connection to others, his unselfishness. I mean, to be a teacher, as you know, I'm married to one, so
Yeah.
I know about some of the powerful connections. He has students in his 50s who still call him Mr. Hoover. It's kind of, but when you described your friend, I just felt as though, you know what, the visceral feeling I got was of these roots, very strong roots and long roots, and that holds a tree up, doesn't it? It's stabilizing piece, and you can't just get those overnight. When the job is too big for one person and you're very ill, you do find out who your friends are.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
They say that, and I think it's really been the case. And then the fact that we've had technology. Look what we're doing here. You're in New York, I'm in Maine, but we're able to at least have this connection, and it's better than nothing. It's not, virtual
Yes.
hugs are not hugs. So next time I see you, it's the real deal. But
okay.
but I wonder, where do we go from here? The distancing, the fear. It seemed as though there was a curve of remembering not to shake hands.
Right.
And I don't have an image for what it's going to look like returning with the knowledge that this is still a mystery. And I don't know, it seems like a very, it's a disconnect that's a concern to me. We're colonizers, we're connectors, but we also rely on touch.
We do. And I think that when we're with our best friends in social situations, you could people will walk in and maintain that social distance, and then after a couple of good laughs and some smiles, they'll forget and they'll get closer, and that seems to be the human condition, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what that means.
Well, I think it was Florida, where it could have been Texas, where they had opened the bars and the numbers were skyrocketing, and the bars have been closed again because of that factor. I think the desire to just forget.
Yes.
I heard a story from a nurse. I think she's a nurse. She was 40 years old in Florida and decided to go out with 15 of her closest friends when everything opened up. And I think the stat was 8 or 9 of them were sick, and 7 of the employees in the bar. It was an Irish bar.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, I can't imagine what the new normal is that people are talking about. What's it like in New York now? Are you seeing a slow return to, what are you seeing?
At work, my office, they've encouraged us to work from home if possible. They opened up the office now for a minimal staff. I work for a large law firm. They've been very considerate. They've been very intelligent about it. I see the summer and people forgetting, what we were just talking about. Restaurants are still closed. Barbershops are still closed. I was in Manhattan. I live in Queens, and I'm comfortable. We're very congested compared to Maine or Texas or Arizona or Montana. But compared to Manhattan, I feel very free here. I went into Manhattan last week. I had an appointment, and I also went to get glasses last week at an optometrist. Felt very, very uncomfortable. I can say this, that regardless of what businesses do, people are going to not go back to their previous behaviors until they feel safe. So there's no amount of legislating that's going to be done. There's no amount of debating that's going to fix that. What we need to do is we need to just kind of sit tight. I think what's going to happen is that we're all going to sit tight. Time is going to develop, and we're going to see with our own eyes, what is actually happening. And then I think that we'll all live accordingly. I know that during the American Revolution, there was a big smallpox epidemic. So it was kind of parallel till today, where we had this happening going on in the country, which brought people together for meetings and protests and a revolution. And then there was a group of people that were out in their farms saying, I want nothing to do with it because there's smallpox going around. I don't want to sound pedantic, but I've been reaching in every single direction I possibly can for an answer for myself. And Marcus Aurelius, do you know his meditations?
I don't.
So he kept a diary, and it was just a daily diary, but it was so well done that it's considered a work of like monumental philosophy. But there was a plague going around in Rome at the time, and he wrote that when besieged by this type of thing, remember that this has happened many times before in history. You're not the first to have it happen to you. And to remember that the world will go on. And so that was like I don't know, like 162 AD that he said that. And so they did the same things back then that we're doing now, is, they stayed away from each other as much as they possibly could, and they used common sense. I think what's a shock for you and I is that we're the first generation. We're of the same generation where, they just came out with antibiotics. So when we were children, tuberculosis could kill you, but they developed a cure for almost everything, including you need a new heart, we'll slap one in. You need a new lung, let's attach one. And now we're in the position that people were in prior to 1950, and we're not used to it.
We're not used to it, and the lack of familiarity, of course, means we are missing certain coping pieces that dropped off, really, through a couple of generations. My mom's mom died at age 34, I believe in 1949, of pneumonia. Even though penicillin was around, it was still being saved for soldiers.
Yes, yes.
You didn't get it, and right. I don't know. I wasn't there, but it just seems as though there were many brutal realities about illness that people took in stride. I don't want to appear at all insensitive by saying took in stride, but they had the frame of reference with infant death mortality, mothers giving birth and dying during childbirth being so much higher. And when I was a kid, so I was born in 56.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me 29 again or whatever people say.
Yeah, I'm the same age. Yeah, we're the same age. Yeah, yeah.
July, what month are you?
December.
Okay, so I am older. I knew it. But you know, in 56, I just remember being really little and adults whispering the C word for cancer.
Mm.
Or, oh, they opened them up and closed them right back up. And as a kid, your job is to figure out some aspect of what they're talking about. It's how you survive, you know, but I could tell by their overall sadness and demeanor, this meant, you know, he wasn't going to be around. And my family was the type that took family members in for those, you know, to
those
care
sick times.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you were taking care of your mom for a long time, didn't you?
Yeah, she's in a home. She's in a home now. They lost 229 patients. They lost over a third of them, and she's untouched. But yeah, including her roommate passed away.
What has that been like for you, if I may ask? Because again, being somewhat removed, I used to work in the geriatric field. Those numbers are staggering. We know it's a vulnerable population. We know there's so many end-of-life issues. But how have you managed the abysmal, I don't know, horrific track record for nursing homes and assisted livings? It seems that they've been hit so hard, so much harder.
They have. This is a clean podcast. I have to watch my language, huh? Or could I use one word?
Please. You know, I didn't set that record a few weeks ago when I started, so have at it.
Just wanted to know what my boundaries were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were a great. My mom worked at that nursing home for like 30 years. So the people that are taking care of her or that surround her are the people that, some of them even that she supervised. So I've had a really great experience with them. Sometime before Easter, where I was able to get a hold of anybody there at, you know, and they'd call me back immediately, I wasn't getting any response. And they did shut down the nursing homes, but that news didn't come out of the carnage that was happening inside. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then one Saturday after Easter, we were doing video conferences, which was wonderful, twice a week. And then they stopped, and I couldn't contact anybody. Like, what happened to my call? You didn't call. What happened to the conference? And somebody told me, said to me, where's your mom? And I told her the nursing home my mom was at. And they said, I just saw it on the news. So I watched this news clip on ABC News, and then it was in the Daily Mail. It made international news that people were dying inside and they were being unresponsive. So just to use the word, I sent a couple of nice emails. I got a couple of very short email back that said, please contact the administrator with any questions or concerns, period. And then I sent a raging email motherfucking them up and down. And then I got a response right away. And what I came to understand, many of the people that live near me actually work in that nursing home. Matter of fact, the cinematographer on the movie that I just filmed, his wife is my mom's physical therapist.
Wow.
And so I was able to work kind of back channels to find out what was going on in the home. And once they got over the initial shock and did everything wrong, then they started to do things right. I've been speaking with her 3 times a week on a video conference. And to answer your question, how I adapted to that was, there was a day at work where my boss called me up and he simply asked me like to dot my I's and cross my T's. And then I just started raging and crying and why, you know, and I was like, you don't understand. And how, you know, and then that's how I handled it. And then I took a week off from work. And with the help, I'm in a better position because with the help of the people in the neighborhood who actually work at the home, I didn't have to go through the administration. I found out what was happening every day. I had people checking on my mom every day. Now the video conferences are back to 3 times a week. They're doing everything properly, and that's how I survived.
Wow. You know, I think I've said wow probably 100 times already in this podcast, which maybe not a great public speaking, but for me, it represents sort of the palpable shock of what we're talking about, and that it hit you personally, and that you got word that this was the nursing home that was on the news. I can't imagine when confronted, or when I encounter a story that I really have no frame of reference for. I think that's the best thing I can say. I can't imagine how you're doing it. I'm glad, so glad for you that it's on this side. When do you think you'll be able to see her?
That's up to the state. I don't know. I don't think anytime this summer. I don't think. I did do a window visit this week. They have a plate glass window.
Where you going?
Yeah. So you stand on one side, she stands on the other, and you talk on the phone. So, that went all right.
Wow.
I have a question for you. How, in your practice, how have your patients been dealing with this? Or have you, like in dealing with people and listening to them, have you found any moments of brilliance like come through your door and say, oh, wow, that's something that this person is doing that I could be doing, or it could be help for me? I'm always interested to find out. I only have the skill set I have, and I'm always interested to find out what other people do as well.
I think you're very humble. We have another podcast about your acting, directing, writing, and editing. As an actor in New York. So moments of brilliance for me as a therapist is a breakthrough, or that I've seen the sheltering have for people who are, quite frankly, they're not racing around the way they once did. And I have a theory about even workaholics, but people who overprogram or program, I guess that sounds like a judgment, who are very programmed. There's never a down moment, up, up, up. And we can do that with technology, with great weather. We can, keep ourselves pretty occupied. So what I have noticed, it's one of those, you can run, but you can't hide. And when people are staying home, many of the things they've kept at bay, or like a finger in the dike kind of thing, or
Right.
piled in the closet, are all seeming to topple over and overwhelm.
Yeah.
And there's a saying about, instead of having a breakdown, having a breakthrough. And for them, I've seen this slow down thing they never would have chosen for themselves has really provided some cool time for self-reflection and raising awareness and making some changes. I did contact someone at Family Probate and say, you should not take applications for divorce for the next 3 months. I think it's an unfair test of any marriage.
Yes.
Together time, we came to Maine for that, but people have asked us, how are you doing with all that together time? Fortunately, we have an art studio and an office, and there have been no people here. So I come into the office where the internet is pretty good. Unlike our phone call last night, where it was like the phone,
it's like,
who are you now? So I apologize for that. But, brilliance for me, I guess, comes in the form of, it's a form of humility, I guess, to be able to say, I don't know. And I will listen, but I'm experiencing my own fear. And, if it helps to say that to you, not to you, but to a client who thinks I may be rocking this, or I have a skill set that's, shepherding me through, I'm pretty quick to say, I have had no dress rehearsal for this. I
Right.
finding the irritability, the challenges, you know, pretty great myself. And I can be a homebody. I can be
Yeah.
shy. A lot of people don't know. I can be very shy.
Okay.
I'm across that way, but trust me, I really, I have that side. So I can curl up with the cats and a book or my writing. You know, I've been trying to do a little more of that, but I'll have to think a little more on your question about moments of brilliance if it applies to me. I'll get back to you.
Okay. That's
I did go back to trying to finish the book that I did on the first podcast. I mentioned that the book has been just sort of sitting there. So I feel that, well, maybe this is a moment of brilliance, that setting the work aside, really brought me to a place of writing a chapter I know I wouldn't have put in the book, which was more vulnerable. I went to a grad school that encouraged use of self.
Yeah.
Many of my clients appreciate that I don't just sit in silence and then say we have to stop. It's a very interactive, empathic. Alice Miller, I think, was the therapist who halfway through her 40 years realized Freud, who she studied under, was doing it wrong, that we really need to be biased and connect with our clients, because we may be the only connecting rod they have in a depleted system. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think for sure. I
yeah.
think, yeah.
So having said that, I wrote this chapter with a little more use of self applying to the topic. It was about weight loss that I did in 2015, but it really is more about the need to, as the pounds drop, you really have to adjust your internal views of yourself so that you don't return to what's familiar, which is maybe the heavier person. It's a long story. Maybe, you know, I don't think you've put on as much as you said in this COVID thing, so you're probably not going to have to read this or want to. But no, I appreciate you talking about the COVID thing. I think the final question probably is about how you believe it's impacting your art and for actors in New York. I mean, this is
Yeah.
go right. What's
I'm not dependent on acting. You know, I have a day job. I'm not a professional. I'm not full time. So many of my friends are, and what it means to be a full time actor means to be a bartender or a waiter or a caterer or a nanny or a dog walker, and constantly looking for acting jobs, and all of that is gone, and they're suffering quite a bit. Really, really suffering quite a bit. There's an older group of actors that that I know, former Emmy winners, former Academy Award winners, series participants, playwrights, who simply who are no longer pursuing their careers, but they still love to act. So they meet every day and they go over scripts and they perform to each other and they perfect and they share, and all of that is gone. And they're home and they're isolated and they're suffering quite a bit as well.
I'm sorry to hear that. Is there a fund that I could post on the soulsisterus.com website, or anything you can think of, or you can post?
I have no idea. That's a great idea to look for something like that. I have no idea. Selfish me, huh? Now that you mention it, I'm going to look up something myself.
I don't consider you selfish. You decided to donate such valuable time with all you have going on to be my guest, and I'm very, very much appreciative of it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And thank you for the update on New York. You know, many of us have only been able to connect through broadcasts and watching your governor, Cuomo, who I appreciated very much in those daily briefings and what he
he stuck to the numbers and the science, and he just knocked the COVID rate down here.
Yeah. Grateful for that, but I'm grateful for the personal side of it, and your willingness to offer some insight today. So I hope that you will come back to my show. This was really a lot of fun. The subject obviously not enjoyable, but real and on a lot of people's minds. So I think you've probably helped a lot of people. And
thank you.
Love to hear more about the art side and the movie. And so you'll come back, right? See, I put you on the spot.
You've put me on the spot. You forced me to do something so that I have something to talk about.
Well, I don't think either one of us would run out, which is great. It's a good problem to have.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, John.